Okay, so thank you for clicking over to part 2 here. And as mentioned, we're going to be talking about the StubHub event that's going to be taking place this weekend in Carson, California. Headlined, of course, by middleweight titleist Gennady Golovkin taking on Marco Antonio Rubio. So, as well on the undercard, of course, Donaire will be taking on Nicholas Walter in a very interesting fight at 126 pounds. But let's get to the main event. Very interesting fight in many respects, in my opinion. I think, to me, it seems as though, at least on paper, the verdict is already in on what will happen when it comes to that fight. I do personally believe that Golovkin has enough punching power to keep Rubio honest. And Rubio, while he does have a very massive punch himself, I think his defensive lapses will ultimately lead to his downfall. Now, Golovkin doesn't have an airtight defense himself, but he is a very seasoned, skilled boxer with an amateur pedigree that does allow for him to capitalize better on your mistakes than the average fighter would capitalize on his mistakes. And there are few of those in his offense. It's not, again, or his defense rather. It's not as though he's just making countless errors that are so easy to see that eventually something is going to catch him. Like any other fighter, he's fallible. He might lose at any point to a punch or a decision or whatever. But the fact is that when you look at it from a purely defensive perspective, it's not as though he's just the most wide open fighter you've ever seen. So, tallying all that up, it does appear as though Golovkin probably takes care of business with Rubio. And if you want to check out more of that, of course, you can check out the link in the description below in the Pick'em category, of course. And tell me what you think on that fight as well. Now, when it comes to the fight and why it interests me is because I think it's going to tell... Okay, think about it this way. As a default setting, every fighter is effectively in a position where they have to prove something to every single person that watches boxing. I mean, effectively that is the case. The only thing you don't have to prove, I don't care how terrible you are in that ring from a boxing standpoint, is that you're at least a semi-brave person. I mean, that has to be the case here, because there's no other logic other than that you're just insane. There's no other logical way to understand why someone would knowingly go into something that will get them punched in the face. So you're obviously a courageous person. Outside of that, you're trying to prove something to everyone that watches boxing. And over time, you begin to chip away at those doubters. Everyone, again, on default, is a doubter. And you have to chip away at them until you're able to convince them. And at least a large enough portion that you have followers, fans, and then, hopefully a career out of this whole thing. Golovkin, I think, took a big chunk of those doubters away with his first sort of exposure on HBO and just being this guy who looked like a murderous puncher. And, HBO quickly got into the Golovkin business, and it was one of those things where it did feel like there was a lot of hype around him. In many ways, it was warranted. Of course, you never know what you're going to get as a finished product, so it wasn't completely warranted. To the best of my understanding, I take some of that back. I think it was warranted in that the middleweight division did need a shot of adrenaline from America's standpoint, from an American entity, if you will. Now, Golovkin, of course, is from Kazakhstan, but he is a product of American... Well, he's a product of American gym and training, but more accurately, in terms of his representation, it's very American in that this is the market they have targeted. They're not targeting Kazakhstan. Even when he fights abroad, it's not in Kazakhstan, or from our perspective, it's not a Kazakhstan fight, it's in Monte Carlo, or whatever the case may be. He is effectively an American fighter in the way that Marco Antonio Barrera was an American fighter. Mexican, not born in America, but he made his bread and butter, both literally and figuratively. He made that in America. He was a product of American boxing and its system, is what I'm trying to say. Came from a different place, trained a different way. All of that has to be appreciated. I'm just talking about from financial and marketing standpoints, so please no one shout me down about how I'm wrong about this. Because first of all, I'm not, and second of all, you're probably going to misinterpret what I'm saying anyway. So just realize that I'm not trying to claim him as an American. In any event, as I was talking about, the American Gennady Golovkin is one of those fighters that definitely felt like he could at least sort of shoot that adrenaline into the 160-pound division. You had Chavez that was leaving. It's a historical division, so you want something there. It always feels like it makes sense. There's so much of a legacy, so many records and records to break, history to make. It just seems like something you should try and get into if there's the talent to do so. And with Chavez leaving, and Martinez probably never going to be the hugest star in America anyway, and coupling that with the fact that he was getting older, and even Miguel Cotto now, all of these pieces that could have eventually played a part in the shaping of middleweight not necessarily being the most stable pieces, you needed that name, and so I get why even years ago, Gennady Golovkin had to sort of be brought in, or someone had to be brought in, if you were to try and keep some of that middleweight interest in America's mind. Now, so all of that having been said, my point, effectively, is that I get why there's that sort of push for him, and I get why he took such a, out of that again, that sort of default, everyone is against you in the beginning chunk, he took about 50-60% of that away instantly with just devastating people. He was set up the right way, and I get how that worked, but I also get why the other 40% might still be like, I don't know, he could just be another product of HBO that they're trying to push down our throats and we're supposed to just buy it and believe it. I get that too. But with wins over a very durable Gabriel Rosado, effectively Rosado being the sort of fighter Rubio is, except that Rosado can box probably a little bit better, but cannot punch as well. And the fact that he took on the likes of Macklin, he took on Ishida, who was okay, had some cachet left over from the James Kirkland fight, because he was able to take out, excuse me, the name is slipping me right now, but my point being that he's had a few people, Daniel Geale, my sincerest apologies to Geale, but because he's able to take out a few recognizable names that certainly are talent, that certainly have an ability, and the fact that he was able to mow over all of them effectively indifferent to who they were. I mean, at the end of the day, if I said, oh, remember the fight where he beat the hell out of that one guy in 3 or 4 rounds and that was it, it pretty much describes every single person I just mentioned, with the exception of the very durable Rosado, which is why I think the fight with Marco Antonio Rubio goes a bit longer than, say, 3 or 4 rounds. But I do think it probably ends at about 6 or 7. In any event, when you do all of these things, I mean, you look at his resume, he is probably the most accomplished middleweight, not probably, he is the most accomplished middleweight at middleweight currently fighting, with maybe the exception of Martinez, if Martinez continues to fight. But I don't think anyone's questioning whether or not, at this point, Golovkin beats Martinez. He does. The question is how quickly, and I think it probably is pretty quickly. Martinez is a very brave guy, but it just doesn't go past 5 rounds, and that's all there is to it. Now, all of that having been said, there still, of course, are those doubters. And I think this is one of those fights that interests me because I think the more devastating Golovkin looks, the quicker he is to completely, as much as you can, of course, to completely convincing the boxing world that this, not only is he legitimate, because I really don't think that's a question anymore, but he is legit. He is a unique fighter that can really beat the hell out of people. Not just the way fighters do. I mean, fighters that fight Floyd Mayweather get beaten to hell, but they don't look it, they don't feel it, it doesn't even look like it in the fight. But if you really analyze what's happening here, they get punched 200-300 times, that guy just got the hell beat out of him, that's all there is to it. But he's really beating the hell out of people, is Gennady Golovkin. And to do it against a very skilled, seasoned veteran, or very durable veteran in Marco Antonio Rubio would be very impressive to me. And again, it's not the, you have to look at it this way as well. There are other middleweights he could fight, someone like a Peter Quillen, someone like a Danny Jacobs, potentially under the right circumstances, a fight with someone like Dmitry Pirog would be an interesting fight. All of these fights are sort of interesting. Martin Murray would be a very interesting fight from my perspective. I like that fight, but you look at those fights, they're all interesting. The question is, if he beat all of these people that I mentioned, or at least a couple of them, there are certain people that just wouldn't credit him because, number one, they probably don't like him for whatever reason, and number two, it's not as though, aside from Miguel Cotto, there's this big, huge, established name fighter that can really, truly fight and bang at the same time. Everyone else has questions, or you feel that the answers to them are not pleasing. So you wouldn't give him so much credit for those wins anyway. So he just has to continue to beat good enough fighters that you just cannot deny him. And Rubio, I think, is a great progression. This is someone that is known for being able to take a punch, and is equally known for being able to deliver one. So I think it's a very interesting fight in that way. It's most interesting to see the response from this fight. Because the other side of this coin is that the less impressive he looks, or the more ordinary he looks, the more those remaining doubters feel validated. And I think that's sort of interesting as well. That's always interesting. In any event, also going to get a bit now into, and again, please leave your comments. I want to hear what you think about the fight, your predictions, all that great stuff. I want to get into a different sort of fight in a sense. I think Donaire is playing the Golovkin part in the co-feature in that he's being tested as well. I think that is sort of the deal. I think, in a sense, Walters signing with Top Rank, that is sort of a situation where I think they're playing it safe. They want to be able to have the winner of that fight regardless of how it ends up shaping up. That being said, I think Donaire is the slightly more established star, to say the least, in the U.S. I think they probably want him to win, but this is the sort of, you still need that test, is my point. They still do need to see where he is against a guy who definitely can punch. Walters can punch. And to me, this is what I call a lie detector test sort of fight. It's one of those fights where the truth's going to come out. You know, it's one of those fights where either we're going to learn a lot about Walters, because regardless of how faded he may or may not be, Donaire, the fact of the matter is he still has enough left to probably beat the majority of the 126-pounders in, say, the top 15 or 20. I think out of the top 20, he still beats at least 11 of them. Yet and still, he might not be exactly who he once was. If Walters is able to beat him, though, I do think it says something about the credibility of Walters, that he is able to beat a guy who still has at least something left in the tank. What we have to determine now, of course, is what is left in that tank. And we will find that truth out as well in this fight, because Walters is the exact sort of guy that a guy like Donaire, who admittedly was thinking about retirement not so long ago, just a mere 2 years ago. That's the exact sort of guy that should not be facing a guy like Walters. I mean, that to me screams, wait a minute, hold on now, let's calm down. I mean, that just says that to me, as loud a voice as possible. Of course, you know, anything can happen in this fight, and it's a very tricky fight to try and predict, to try to see through. You don't know what Donaire has left. You don't know what Walters has in the first place. But it is a very interesting fight. I do think the powers that be are hoping for that Donaire win. So maybe that means something in the end. Maybe that means something in terms of how maybe decisions might go. Things like that. Who knows? But what I can say is it's interesting that Donaire has been so quiet to the lead-up of this fight. It's interesting that Walters has been so vocal. I don't know enough about Walters or his personality, certainly, to determine whether or not that's a good or a bad thing for him. I'm also not a psychiatrist, so it's not like if I knew him, I'd have any fucking clue anyway. But what I can say is it's a very interesting fight in a lot of ways. Very intriguing, more the accurate word, because I don't exactly know what to make of any particular part of it. I just know it interests me. I just know there's something there that seems like it could be special or different about this fight. Maybe not necessarily how it materializes itself in the ring, but just in terms of its, maybe the goings-on that have gone into the fight itself and making it, but also what it might lead to. But it is one of those fights, like I said, I think Donaire goes into it like the Golovkin of it. You're expecting to find out something about him, just at a different point in his career, of course. And, of course, like with Golovkin-Rubio, I want to hear your thoughts on Donaire versus Walters. Sorry for a bit of the rambling there, but it just is a really interesting, weird, hard-to-figure-out fight for me, and it's very interesting. I like it a lot. It's a pretty good card. I mean, those two fights right there are pretty much worth the price of admission. Want to hear what you guys have to say about the fights. Who do you think is going to win? What are your picks, predictions, futures, all that great stuff? Leave it in the comments section below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all that great stuff. Follow on Twitter at 12Rounder Boxing. And, of course, be sure to check out 12rounder.com. I appreciate all the support. Love to hear from you guys. And until next time... Oh, almost forgot the schedule. Gennady Golovkin versus Marco Antonio Rubio. And, of course, Nonito Donaire versus Nicholas Walter. And that pretty much wraps up the schedule. Steve Cunningham, of course, for a great cause, will be fighting this weekend as well. So be sure to check that out in the schedule link below. But that is primarily the big fight, so be sure to check that out. And, of course, until next time, enjoy the fights.